So where does it come from, that inner sense of right and wrong? Is it like a fixed star in the sky, a divine law that's always been there? Or is it something, well, something we make up as we go along? A compass we build ourselves from the shifting sands of human history? It's probably one of the biggest questions we can ask. And that's exactly what we're diving into here. Two very powerful and very different answers. This line, it really captures the heart of the challenge, doesn't it? The idea that our moral compass isn't some gift from on high, but something we've harvested ourselves, using our own reason, changing as the world changes. It perfectly sets the stage for this deep disagreement about what our values really are and where they come from. Okay, so let's start with that first perspective, the argument from moral relativity. And it's a really strong critique. The thinking goes like this. If morality came from one single, unchanging God, then shouldn't it be the same everywhere and for all time? But, when you actually look at human history, that's not what we see at all. This critique really stands on four main pillars. First off, you've got the simple fact that different cultures have wildly different ideas about what's right and wrong. Then there's the fact that our own values have changed so dramatically over the centuries. A third point, and it's a big one, is that even sacred texts can seem ambiguous, leading to all sorts of conflicting interpretations. And finally, science can now offer natural explanations for why we have morals, things like evolution and social cooperation that don't seem to need a divine being at all. And this timeline just drives that point home. It shows this clear path where things like slavery, which were once totally accepted, even justified by some religious views, are now seen as monstrous. It really makes it look like morality isn't some fixed command from above, but more of a human project, a process of us learning and growing over time. And that brings us right to the heart of it. Does all this change, all this evolution, mean that our values are ultimately just made up, built on nothing more solid than the shifting sands of culture? Or is it possible that underneath all that movement, there's something solid, a real foundation that we've been struggling to see clearly all this time? All right, let's turn now to the second perspective. This view presents what you could call a divine moral architecture. The Quranic framework doesn't just offer a simple, no, you're wrong. Instead, it proposes a much more sophisticated system, one that's actually designed to make sense of both those timeless principles and our very human, very changeable history. This whole framework starts with a core concept called Fitrah. Now, this isn't just some vague idea of a conscience. It's described as the very law of our creation, our basic built-in design. The idea is that every single human is born with a faculty for reason, almost like an intellectual receiver that is tuned to recognize objective moral truths, things like justice, goodness, and compassion. So what is this innate capacity meant to recognize? Well, that's where the Quran's Muhkamat come in. These are the clear, foundational principles that form the absolute bedrock of the whole system. These are the non-negotiables, the absolutes, the command for justice, the sanctity of life, the call for compassion. This is the solid, unchanging core. And right there, that's the key. This framework makes a critical distinction. It separates the eternal, divine principles from our very human, evolving, and often deeply flawed attempts to apply them. So in this view, the moral law itself never changes. What changes is our understanding, our society, and our constant struggle to put those perfect principles into practice in an imperfect world. Okay, so let's put this framework to the test. Let's take one of the toughest moral challenges in all of human history, the institution of slavery. I mean, if these foundational principles are truly timeless, how on earth does this system deal with the historical fact that slavery was accepted for so long? The critique is simple, right? Religious texts, the Quran included, didn't abolish slavery with one command. They regulated it. And in doing so, they seem to justify it. But the Quranic framework makes a totally different claim. It argues that what was introduced wasn't an acceptance of slavery at all, but a brilliant, strategic system designed for one purpose, to gradually and systematically dismantle the entire institution from the inside out. So how did it do that? It wasn't a single command, it was a multi-pronged attack on the institution. First, it completely redefined freedom, elevating it to one of the highest acts of piety. Then it mandated legal contracts, giving enslaved people a clear legal pathway to freedom. It even allocated state funds, a line item in the divine budget, you could say, specifically to buy people's freedom. And crucially, it moved to shut down the primary ways new people could be enslaved in the first place. When you look at it through that lens, The whole picture just changes. It's no longer about passively tolerating an evil. It's presented as an active, intentional, hostile takeover of a deeply embedded global system. The goal wasn't just to manage bondage. The goal was to restore the inherent God-given dignity of every single human being.
But that brings us back to another one of those pillars of the critique, the ambiguity. If a text is truly divine, why is it so open to interpretation? Why do even believers themselves disagree so profoundly on what it means?
Well, the framework has an answer for that, and it's a concept called ijtihad. This is the sanctioned intellectual struggle to understand and apply those timeless principles, the Muhkamat, to new challenges and changing times. So the human need to interpret the text isn't seen as a flaw in the system. It's actually a built-in, essential feature of how it's all supposed to work. And it just allows for this beautiful, dynamic relationship between a timeless text and the messy flow of human history. It explains how our understanding can grow, how our applications can evolve, sometimes with great difficulty, without ever threatening the divine source of those core moral laws. The striving, the effort, the debate, that's all part of the design. Okay, that brings us to the final piece of the critique, the idea that naturalistic explanations are really all we need. If evolution and social contracts can explain how morality works to help us survive, why bring a divine source into it at all? What does it add? This table really sharpens the contrast. The Quranic framework doesn't necessarily disagree with the how, the mechanics of social cooperation that science describes. What it does is answer the why. It argues that while naturalism sees morality as a tool for survival, the divine framework gives it a much deeper purpose. It's about fulfilling a sacred trust. And maybe most importantly, it grounds our morality in a system of ultimate, divine accountability that goes far beyond just what other people think of us. And this final quote brings it all home with such profound simplicity. In a universe governed by this principle, not a single act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever lost, and no injustice, no matter how hidden, is ever forgotten. Morality stops being just a good social strategy, and it becomes something of cosmic importance. And that really leaves us with a final question to ponder. What does it mean to truly live as if every single atom's weight of our actions matters forever?